WhatsApp messages in the middle of the night from people calling you names and stuff, and it must be appalling. Whereas when I was at school, you left it, you got home, and you were in your safe home environment.
Very good point.
And that doesn't exist anymore, and you can make terrible mistakes. You see about these kids that send explicit photographs of themselves to each other, and that's the kind of thing kids do, because kids have no concept that could be seen as being really bad, and then they end up on sex offenders registers and things like that. And it's a minefield that the mistakes that my generation was able to make, and the mistakes that any generation going through that period of their lives up until the advent of the internet, those mistakes were forgotten. There was no record of those mistakes. Whereas now, somebody does something, or somebody comes to a position of prominence, and they go back through their Facebook feed and their Twitter feed, and people find things they've said 10 years ago. I'd hate that. I'd hate if people could find things that I'd said when I was 12. Because I said some stupid shit when I was 12.
Imagine, look at what happened with Kevin Spacey and these celebrities, where from stuff that happened almost 20 years ago that are being brought up are ending these people's career. Can you imagine having that on record, on digital record, and what you do in middle school, can get you fired from a corporation 40 years later? I mean, that's... Well,
absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, somebody like Kevin Spacey is in a position where there's no physical record of that thing having happened.
Right.
So he can still deny it. It's, and that they can, those people who are in those trouble, whether they've done it or not, and my feeling is that they have, but they'll always have that ability to say, well, I didn't do it. And they'll always have a small number of people who will go, no, he didn't do it, I still support him. But if you've got it there, as a record of it happening with your voice and your face and it happening, a recording of the event, then there's no denying that. And kids don't seem to get that what they're doing is throwing all this information about themselves into the world that will be there forever, which is a bit of an irony considering that's what I'm doing with the book.
I was getting ready to say that. I wrote down on my notepad right here, I said, you're literally waving your indictment papers in the air.
Yeah. But the thing is, I mean, I suppose from my point of view, is I'm doing it consciously and I'm aware of the ramifications and the possible fallout from it. It's not something that I'm just doing because I'm a kid and that's what kids do. And I think I think to be in a situation where all the things you've ever done that were bad are permanently recorded without it being something you've decided to make public, I think that's an awful situation to be in. I mean, I'm in a very, very different situation to that because I've got control over what stories I tell. Though I'm trying very hard to be very honest about myself, probably something in my subconscious is stopping me writing certain things. But with the kids, he's got all their stuff, that they just typed on Twitter and in spur of the moment, or stuff they splurged out on Facebook. A good example. I think everybody does it. They open Facebook in the morning and it has the on this day thing, and you go back, you go, oh, I wonder what I was doing a year ago, and you go back and it's starting to get to 10 years ago, and you go back and go, oh God, I can't believe I wrote that.
Yes.
And that's stuff as an adult that I've written. It's even stuff I've said a few years ago. Poorly worded things or things that I've known that I didn't mean a certain way but came across that way. I still kind of cringe about that. But yeah, it must be a nightmare being in a situation where you can make that happen to yourself.
You see all these doors that you're opening here by what you're doing.
This is it. I mean, if it's something that causes people to have these conversations, then that's maybe got some value. Maybe I can fool myself into thinking that there's a positive outcome in that way. But it's
true. It's true.
Yeah.
And also a theme in your book that is very strong against religion. Can you kind of go through kind of that tone in the book? Because I noticed that when you get to those particular parts, it's very sharp, especially with the original sin.
Yeah, I was brought up. My parents were religious, so I was brought up in a religious household, and there was a lot of things I hated about it, but it was more the kind of social side of it. And I think as anybody who's brought up religious, I just accepted that it was true. But there are certain things as I got older that made less and less sense. And the notion, like you say, about the original sin thing, the original sin is such an obscene idea. The idea that I'm guilty of something that somebody did, 200 years ago. Again, I mean, you can bring it into today's world where, there's a debate about whether Americans should be paying reparations to the descendants of slaves. And it's a really difficult situation because the people living now had nothing to do with what happened then. But you can make the argument that there should be something paid and some kind of form of collective apology. But I don't think there's any need for the individual to take responsibility for it. And I think maybe, you'll get some people on the right will say, oh, this is terrible. Why are they apologizing for it? I think they don't understand that it's a group apology. It's apology on behalf of a group that is maybe not there to apologize anymore. And they're not taking personal responsibility for what happened, but they are saying this happened. It's awful. It's people who were in the past have led to me, and on their behalf, I apologize.
I think that was very well said for something that is a very raw, very kind of pushed under the rug, I think, issue, because there seems to be a tendency in this country to try to turn away and push back in the closet that entire period. It's not anything that people want to talk about. It's not something that we want to acknowledge. And I think what that does is cause a bigger rift. I think by ignoring that that period in time happened and not saying that it was wrong publicly and making sure that there is no question that was wrong and that we were wrong on that that side of it, that it's almost like a pressure cooker because there's tension between two sides, a side that doesn't want to own up to what happened, and then a side that is saying, why won't you just admit that you did this?
Well, I think one of the examples in the book I make is about the child born in Germany today is no more responsible for the Holocaust than I am for, Adam sinning. I think Germany's maybe a good example that children in Germany, as far as I know, are brought up being fully aware of what happened. It's not glossed over in their history lessons. They aren't told that it was some kind of, wonderful thing that happened. They've taken full responsibility for it. And as a result, within Europe, everybody, within those countries, as much as you can, gets on. There isn't that negative feeling against Germany from the rest of Europe that there could have been if Germany had gone, no, we didn't do anything. What's it to do with us?
Right.
They've taken full responsibility for it, even though pretty much everybody who's involved is dead. The nation has said, this happened. This is a stain on our past. We are not going to pretend it didn't happen. We will be open and honest about it. And it's allowed that it's not an issue that comes up.
Right.
There isn't that sense that there's an avoidance of talking about it and that that people are just going, oh yeah, no, it's just, it's fine. And so it doesn't cause that bitterness. It's not the victims of it aren't going, well, it's terrible. They're not taking any responsibility. So it doesn't remain in the news because of that. And yeah, I think that's because of that sense that it was addressed, remains something that is taught and people are educated about.
That's a very good point. And I completely agree. I think it's one of those things that if we just talk about, it's like being in a relationship. If you keep everything pent up that bothers you and you don't express how you're feeling or any type of remorse, it just keeps it's pent up and it's like a pressure cooker and it's just trying to get out, and eventually it will. And usually under those circumstances it doesn't end very well. And I think that if we just let it out and get it over with and just move on, I think we could be in a much better place. Somehow, though, we've lost, sight of that. I think you could make the argument that we were equally as horrendous to a group of people as Germany was. I think that the Holocaust and the American slave trade are on equal footing in terms of atrocity. I think that argument could easily be made.
You could make the argument. I think it's a dangerous argument to make, but it's one that it's an alluring argument. The problem with doing it is that it then possibly could lessen both of them. I think you're taking two separate appalling events that changed the future for millions and millions of people, and you can say this had a negative impact on X number of people and this had a negative impact on X number of people. And I suppose when it comes down to numbers, you could start to make an argument that the effects have been as long lasting for those similar amounts of people.
Sure.
But it's the difficulty is that it then, from what I just said, then it comes down to, it's based on numbers and the way people were treated. It comes down to, forced movement of people. It comes down to treating some people as being less valuable because they're not like you or I.
Murder.
And there's a link there. The two things, have got something in common there. The forced removal from place to place. I think what the Nazis did was straight up evil, but then they thought that what they were doing was right. And I think what the slavers did was straight up evil, but they could justify it to themselves through their religious beliefs. And I think one thing, I suppose the thing we can take from both of them is that as a species, we're very good at justifying appalling behaviour to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, and the thing is, similar things happened around the world.
Sure.
And similar events happened that caused the displacement and deaths of millions and millions of people. It's a really difficult topic to approach.
It is.
Because the Holocaust is a horrendous event.
No question.
And it's no one wants to kind of take away from how awful it was. And I'm very conscious that I'm treading very carefully with the way I'm wording things because
Absolutely.
It's so easy for people to take things out of context.
Absolutely.
And I think partly there's maybe that whole thing that you just nobody wants to compare things to it for fear of being seen to lessen it.
And that makes sense. That's well said, I think.
Yeah, and it's a horrendous thing, but we also need to be able to accept that other horrendous things have happened. It's not like a competition between them. But I suppose that one's possibly, sits there so kind of casting a shadow over everything even now because it affected so many people in an era where there was, reporting and you could find out what was happening around the world. It's the first of those kind of things that have happened in what was turning into the modern world. So it feels more real because we've got photographs of it happening and we've got film footage of it. And we know people whose grandparents went through it. There's still that living link to it.
Very good point.
Whereas I think with possibly like with slavery and, other things that have happened, over the years that there isn't that living link to it anymore. So we're able to box it away as being something that, yes, that was awful, but it's in the past. Whereas with the Holocaust, it still is relatively recent for us. It's something, I'm 45 now and I was born in 1972. So what would that have been? 30? So the war was the distance between me now and when I was born is greater, distance than between the end of the war and me being born.
Wow,
and
that's wild.
It's a crazy thing to think about. It's insane to think about that. And because when these things have happened before you were born, they just seem just so abstract and so long ago. It doesn't matter that, like the Beatles split up like a year, 2 years before I was born. That's just crazy to think that it was the 60s 3 years before I was born.
Wow.
And, that kind of, and I think as you get older, you get more kind of perspective on the length of time. But I think this is the thing. It's something that the Holocaust is very, very recent, and it's still, the ripples from it are still kind of going out around the world.
Sure.
And there's the things that led to it are now starting to rear their ugly heads again around the world.
Yeah.
It's a kind of terrifying thing that you kind of think, well, hang on a second, are we going to repeat this? Is it this 70-year cycle where everybody who was involved with something is dead, so the next generation has no physical connection to it anymore, and then makes the same mistake again?
I thought up until 2016 that, very naively, but the world was making steps in the right direction towards, kind of a more peaceful and blended and, just tolerant, especially with having, Obama. And whether you like him or you don't, he was a pinnacle in American history because, stemming from what we were just talking about, slavery. And we just elected a African-American president twice. And to me, I stand back and I'm like, hey, bad things can happen in your history, but you can get through it. And then in 2016, it's like I woke up on November the 9th in a completely different nation that I never knew existed. I didn't know the amount of bigoted people that existed until they elected Donald Trump. Almost like a twilight zone where nothing's real, up is down, and truths have alternate aspects to them now.
Mm-hmm. Well, the same thing happened in the UK with the Brexit vote. And I've been trying to think of what's caused these things. And it feels almost like it's the last gasp of a generation that knows that people who are young now aren't going to do that. That young people are far more tolerant and far more liberal, regardless of their background. I mean, this is the same thing. It's the same thing that leads to things like ISIS and Islamic extremism, is that the people doing